Have you ever wondered why policies that are supposed to be chosen by the people so often serve the same narrow group of the wealthy? You are told that elections give you power, that a free press protects you, that laws are written to safeguard your life. But behind the stage, there is a smaller circle, a network of decision-makers who quietly shape the frame of the entire game. Who really decides the future of nations? Why do you so rarely notice that you are being steered rather than leading? And why, no matter which party wins, the system seems to move in the same direction? In this video, we are going to pull back the curtain. We will uncover how elites manipulate nations through theories that stretch back more than 100 years. From Pareto's concept of the circulation of elites to Machiavelli's ruthless manual on holding power, you will see how the playbook is written and how it still operates in our time. By the end, you will not look at politics, media, or power in the same way again. And you may lose a little sleep once you realize who actually pulls the strings. To understand how nations are manipulated, we need to begin with a theory that is more than a century old. It comes from the Italian economist and sociologist Vilfredo Pareto, a man who studied power not as an ideal, but as a mechanism. He asked a blunt question: who really governs when everyone is told they live in a democracy? When we say secret elites, we do not mean a hidden lodge or a Hollywood-style conspiracy. We mean the small fraction of society that has the means to shape decisions, to influence public opinion, and to control the institutions that decide outcomes. Sometimes they are visible, the politicians, the CEOs, the generals, but often they are invisible, the think tanks that draft legislation, the foundations that sponsor research, the boards and councils that decide which voices get amplified and which are silenced. Pareto called this the circulation of elites. In every society, power concentrates in the hands of a minority. Over time, old elites weaken and are replaced by new ones. The faces change, the slogans change, the uniforms change, but the structure remains. Power does not dissolve into the hands of the masses. It simply rotates from one elite faction to another. Think of revolutions. The monarchy falls, a republic is declared, new parties rise. But who gains control? Almost always, a new elite steps in to take the place of the old. Pareto noted that the masses rarely become the true rulers. Instead, they become the followers, mobilized, inspired, and often sacrificed, while elites negotiate who will sit at the top. This is why the theory matters. It explains why, despite massive upheavals, so many patterns of domination repeat themselves. You vote for change, you march in the streets, you watch a new leader sworn in, and for a brief moment, hope is alive. Yet years later, you realize that the same corporate interests are funded, the same military alliances are maintained, and the same economic structures are untouched. Pareto would say this is not an accident. It is the natural cycle of elite circulation. Elections and revolutions are moments when one group of elites hands the baton to another, while the structure of control stays intact. The disturbing conclusion is this: when you cast your vote, you may be choosing between faces, but not between systems. You are offered a menu, but the kitchen, the recipes, and the owners of the restaurant remain the same. That is the first layer of the game. But knowing who the elites are is only half the story. The more pressing question is how they actually manipulate the crowd, how they secure their grip on power, and how they keep nations in line. For that, we turn to the political playbook written 500 years ago by Niccolo Machiavelli. If Pareto shows us the structure of elites, Machiavelli teaches us the craft. 5 centuries ago, in Renaissance Florence, he wrote The Prince, a manual that stripped politics of its illusions. He argued that power is not about ideals, it is about survival, manipulation, and control. The lessons he wrote for princes still read like the playbook of modern elites. Machiavelli's first principle was that appearances matter more than reality. The vulgar crowd is always taken by appearances, he observed. People do not see into the hearts of rulers. They see images, rituals, and carefully staged performances. This is why modern elites invest billions in public relations, media spin, and polished symbolism. The leader may be corrupt or ruthless, but if he can project strength, compassion, or patriotism on screen, the crowd will follow. The second principle is fear versus love. Machiavelli admitted that it is good for a ruler to be loved, but if he must choose, it is safer to be feared. Love is fragile. It depends on the emotions of the crowd, which can change overnight. Fear is stable because it can be enforced through laws, police, surveillance, and punishment. Today we see this logic in the way governments use crises to expand control. Terrorist attacks, pandemics, financial collapses. Each event becomes an opportunity to increase monitoring, pass emergency measures, and demand obedience in the name of safety. Third, divide and rule. A united people is dangerous to elites. A divided people is harmless. Machiavelli knew this well, and rulers throughout history have mastered it. Modern elites amplify divisions through media polarization, culture wars, and the constant framing of an enemy, whether foreign or domestic. As long as citizens are fighting each other, they will not organize against those above them. Fourth, control institutions, not just individuals. A prince can intimidate a rival, but real power lies in shaping the rules of the game. This is why elites focus on laws, regulations, and bureaucracies. They build systems that reward loyalty and punish dissent automatically. Once the structure is in place, it does not matter who sits in office, because the framework of control runs itself. Think of the revolving door between corporations and regulators, or the legal codes that quietly favor entrenched interests. These are modern echoes of Machiavelli's advice. Finally, Machiavelli embraced pragmatism, even ruthlessness. He argued that in politics, the ends justify the means. A ruler who clings to moral purity will not survive. Deception, manipulation, and cruelty, if used strategically, are not sins, but tools. In our time, this is reflected in lobbying tactics, staged grassroots movements, and the carefully managed theater of democracy. The public sees a contest of ideas. Behind the curtain, elites play a game of calculated maneuvers free of sentiment. This is why Machiavelli still matters. He described the techniques of power with brutal honesty, and his insights echo in every headline today. From image management to manufactured fear, from divide and rule to institutional capture, the fingerprints of his manual are everywhere. Pareto explained that elites always circulate. Machiavelli explained how they endure. Together they form the skeleton and the muscle of domination. But to see how this works in practice, we need to examine the modern toolbox that elites use to manipulate nations in our own era. Pareto gave us the structure. Machiavelli gave us the tactics. But in our own time, elites have assembled a toolbox far more advanced than anything the Renaissance could imagine. These tools are not theories. They are institutions, systems, and technologies that operate every day in plain sight. And once you see them, you cannot unsee them. The first and most obvious tool is economic power. Money is not just wealth, it is leverage. Through control of capital, elites shape policy, reward allies, and punish opponents. Central banks set interest rates that determine whether families prosper or collapse. Investment giants allocate billions in ways that steer entire industries. Bailouts rescue corporations deemed too big to fail, while ordinary workers are told to tighten their belts. Economic pressure becomes political control because governments who depend on financial stability will bend to those who hold the purse strings. The cycle is simple. Fund campaigns, influence tax laws, protect markets. The flow of money decides who survives and who does not. The second tool is regulatory capture. On paper, regulators are meant to restrain powerful industries. In reality, they are often staffed, funded, or influenced by the very corporations they oversee. The revolving door moves seamlessly. A lawyer defends a corporation today, writes the regulations tomorrow, and returns to the corporation the next year. Research grants are funded to produce the right conclusions. Legal frameworks are drafted to appear neutral, but tilt the field toward insiders. For the public, the law looks impartial. For elites, it is a custom-made shield. This is the quiet genius of regulatory capture. You do not need to bribe a politician if you can write the rules yourself. The third tool is media control and the manufacturing of consent. Most people believe they are informed because they watch the news. But media conglomerates are not neutral. Ownership is concentrated in a few corporations. Advertising revenue shapes which stories are amplified and which are buried. Narratives are repeated until they feel like truth, while dissenting voices are framed as fringe or irresponsible. As Noam Chomsky described, mass media does not just report reality, it filters and manufactures a version of reality that aligns with elite interests. You can see this when scandals explode for weeks to distract, or when uncomfortable stories vanish after a single headline. Consent is not demanded at gunpoint. It is produced through repetition, framing, and selective attention. The fourth tool is education and research. Schools and universities appear to be neutral spaces of learning. But curriculum design, grant priorities, and textbook selection are influenced by those who fund them. When large foundations or governments set the agenda, generations of students learn to think inside boundaries that serve elite interests. History is edited to highlight certain narratives and omit others. Economics is taught with assumptions that favor specific markets. Even science, which prides itself on neutrality, can be shaped by who pays for the studies. The result is a society that feels educated, but in fact is trained to reproduce the worldview of its patrons. The fifth tool is philanthropy and soft power. This may seem paradoxical. How can charity be a weapon? But large foundations and billionaire philanthropists use donations strategically. By funding universities, art museums, or global health programs, they purchase legitimacy and goodwill. The public sees generosity, but elites gain influence over cultural and intellectual life. When a foundation funds a think tank, it shapes policy debates. When it supports a global initiative, it sets priorities that align with its own interests. Soft power is the velvet glove that covers the iron fist. It does not look like domination, it looks like benevolence. And that is precisely why it is effective. The sixth and perhaps most powerful modern tool is technology and data. Algorithms decide what you see, what you believe, and even what you desire. Social media platforms gather billions of data points to build psychological profiles, then feed you targeted content designed to influence mood and behavior. Political campaigns no longer rely only on speeches or television ads. They micro-target voters with messages tailored to individual fears and hopes. Surveillance systems track movements, communications, and financial transactions. Predictive algorithms guide policing, lending, and hiring. For elites, data is the new weapon. With enough information, they do not need to guess what the crowd will do. They can predict it, and in many cases, they can direct it. When you place these tools side by side, the pattern becomes clear. Economic leverage pressures governments. Regulatory capture bends the law. Media frames the narrative. Education shapes the next generation. Philanthropy buys legitimacy. Technology engineers behavior. Each tool alone is powerful, but together they create an ecosystem of control. A system that looks democratic, feels free, and yet operates within boundaries drawn by a few hands at the top. This is the modern toolbox of the elites. It is not hidden. It does not need to be. It thrives on the assumption that most people will never look closely, will never ask who funds the study, who owns the network, who writes the regulation, who designs the algorithm. But once you do ask, you begin to see the strings that pull the puppet. The question now is not just what tools exist, but why we fall for them. Why do entire populations accept the images, the narratives, and the frames handed to them? The answer lies not only in the systems outside us, but in the psychology within us. To understand how manipulation works on the human mind, we need to explore the biases and vulnerabilities that elites exploit. The tools of elites are powerful, but they only work because of the way the human mind is wired. Pareto and Machiavelli understood the structures of power, but modern elites rely on psychology just as much as institutions. They exploit biases that are built into all of us, turning our own instincts into levers of control. The first is authority bias. Human beings are inclined to trust those who carry titles, uniforms, or credentials. When a figure is introduced as an expert, a doctor, or a general, we lower our guard. Elites know this, which is why they invest heavily in producing experts who speak their language. Funded think tanks, industry-sponsored scientists, or polished spokespeople step forward and the public accepts their words without asking who pays them. The second is repetition and availability. If you hear something often enough, it begins to feel true, even if it is not. This is called the illusory truth effect. A phrase repeated in headlines, a slogan on every channel, a meme circulating in your feed. The more you encounter it, the more natural it feels. Elites flood the environment with messages until questioning them feels abnormal. The third is fear. Fear is the oldest tool of rulers. When people are afraid, they crave protection. Elites frame crises in ways that make the public accept restrictions they would never tolerate in calmer times. Wars, pandemics, and economic crashes become opportunities to expand surveillance, pass emergency laws, and centralize authority. The fear may fade, but the new powers remain. The fourth is identity and polarization. Humans are tribal creatures. We define ourselves by who we are and who we oppose. Elites use this to divide populations into camps. They amplify differences, pit groups against each other, and create enemies both inside and outside the nation. While citizens fight each other, elites consolidate their hold above the fray. The fifth is prestige bias and social proof. People imitate those they perceive as successful or admired. If a celebrity endorses a narrative, millions adopt it. If an institution with prestige declares a truth, few dare to question it. Elites understand this perfectly, which is why they sponsor cultural icons, fund institutions, and create an aura of inevitability around their decisions. When you put these biases together, the result is powerful. Authority gives the message credibility. Repetition makes it familiar. Fear makes it urgent. Identity makes it personal. Prestige makes it respectable. By the time the message has passed through all of these filters, it feels less like propaganda and more like common sense. This is why manipulation is so effective. It does not feel like manipulation. It feels like the way the world has always been. But history shows us otherwise. The fingerprints of these tactics can be traced through centuries of events. And if we want to see the pattern clearly, we need to examine some case studies where elites have used these very mechanisms to bend nations to their will. To see how these patterns play out, we do not need speculation. History itself is the archive of elite manipulation. The faces and technologies change, but the underlying mechanics remain strikingly consistent. Consider ancient Rome. As the empire expanded and unrest grew, rulers discovered the formula of bread and circuses. They provided free grain to the masses and staged lavish gladiator games. The policy distracted citizens from corruption and inequality, buying loyalty with entertainment and subsistence. On the surface, it looked like generosity. In reality, it was a tool to pacify and divide, ensuring the people would never unite against the senatorial and imperial elites. Move forward to the industrial age. Factories reshaped society, and with them came a new class of economic elites. Captains of industry built fortunes, then used them to influence legislation, labor laws, and infrastructure. They funded newspapers, lobbied governments, and in many cases, directly entered politics. Workers may have believed they were part of progress, but the rules of the new system were written to secure industrial power. Pareto's circulation of elites was on full display. Old aristocracies faded, but new industrial elites stepped in to inherit their place. The 20th century brought the rise of modern media. Mass communication became the stage where consent was manufactured. During wars, governments used newspapers, radio, and later television to frame conflicts as moral crusades. Propaganda was not only about convincing people of victory, but also about narrowing the field of acceptable debate. Dissenting voices were painted as unpatriotic. Citizens thought they were choosing sides freely, but their choices had been sculpted by what was shown, repeated, and glorified. Chomsky's model of media filtering captures exactly how elites shaped public opinion by deciding what could and could not be said. Then came financial deregulation in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Here we see regulatory capture in action. Banking and investment sectors poured money into lobbying, revolving doors, and campaign donations. Regulations were loosened, oversight weakened, and risky practices encouraged. The result was financial collapse, most visibly in 2008. Millions lost homes and jobs, while the institutions that caused the crisis were rescued with public funds. The masses paid the cost. The elites wrote the rules, broke them, and then ensured they would not suffer the consequences. Finally, look at the digital era. Big data and social media created new methods of control. Algorithms filtered information so that each person lived inside a personalized bubble. During elections, campaigns delivered micro-targeted ads that spoke to individual fears and desires. Public opinion was no longer shaped in broad strokes. It was engineered one user at a time. And behind it all was an industry funded by advertising dollars and driven by elite interests in maintaining influence. The illusion of choice became stronger than ever, even as actual autonomy weakened. These case studies span 2,000 years, yet the theme is the same. Elites manipulate nations by providing distraction, by reshaping laws, by controlling narratives, by capturing regulators, and now by programming the flow of information itself. The forms evolve. The logic endures. Knowing this history is not about despair, it is about recognition. Because once you recognize the pattern, you can begin to ask a new question. If this is how power operates, what can ordinary people do to resist it? That is where we turn next. At this point, you might feel a mix of clarity and frustration. You see the pattern, but the question remains. What can be done? History shows that elites are powerful, but that does not mean individuals are powerless. Resistance begins with recognition, and recognition grows into practice. There are steps you can take, some small, some collective, that shift the balance. The first level is personal. You can refine how you consume information. Instead of relying on a single outlet, compare 2 or 3 sources, especially those with opposing perspectives. When an expert speaks, take 30 seconds to check who funds their institution or their research. Keep a simple media diary for a week, writing down the headlines you saw and how they made you feel. By the end, you will notice which emotions were being triggered and which narratives were repeated until they felt natural. Even simple habits like discussing a news story with someone outside your circle can puncture the bubble and sharpen your critical edge. The second level is community. You are less vulnerable when you are not alone. Form a small watch group with friends or colleagues. Assign each person to follow different outlets, then meet once a week to compare what each source emphasized or ignored. Very quickly, you will see that information is not a neutral mirror, it is a battlefield. You can also experiment with documenting local issues yourself. Visit a town hall, photograph a new development, interview a neighbor. Act for one day as a citizen journalist and you will understand how much mainstream outlets leave out. These small acts create not only knowledge, but solidarity. The third level is systemic. No single person can rewrite the rules, but small actions accumulate. Before voting, look up the donation records of the candidate you support. Notice which industries appear again and again. Write a single email to your representative asking whether they accept funding from those industries. Most will ignore you, but some will answer, and the very act shifts your role from spectator to participant. You can also redirect a fraction of your spending to independent investigations. $5 or $10 a month may not seem like much, but multiplied across thousands, it sustains the voices that elites would rather silence. These actions will not topple the system overnight, but they recalibrate how you see, how you speak, and how you act. They transform you from a passive consumer of narratives into an active observer, a critic, and in time, a counterweight. The point is not to achieve purity or certainty. The point is to develop habits of resistance that remind you daily that freedom is not given, it is practiced. And once you begin to practice, you see the game differently. The strings are still there, but they no longer move you in the same way. You become harder to manipulate, harder to divide, and harder to rule. We began with a simple question: who really pulls the strings? Pareto showed us that elites never disappear, they only circulate. Machiavelli revealed the methods they use to maintain control, from appearances to fear, from division to institutions. Modern history added the toolbox of money, media, education, philanthropy, and technology. And psychology explained why these tools are so effective, because they reach directly into our instincts. The lesson is not despair. The lesson is awareness. You cannot dismantle what you cannot see. But once you see, you have already taken the first step toward freedom. Knowing the game does not mean the game ends. It means you stop playing blindly. Every elite depends on one thing: the consent of those they govern. The moment citizens begin to recognize the pattern, to question the image, to follow the money, and to speak with each other, the grip of manipulation weakens. It does not take a revolution of millions to begin. It takes individuals who refuse to accept the script written for them. So take what you have heard and test it in your own life. Notice the stories you are told. Ask who benefits. Share your observations with others. And if this message resonated, share this video, subscribe, and join the conversation. Freedom is not delivered from above. It is earned through vigilance, intelligence, and action. The strings are real, but so is your capacity to cut them.